Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
There's this weird phenomena happening around relationships. It's almost like diametrically opposed. I see some people in this whole, I'm not going to be in a relationship, I just need to work on myself. Relationships are stifling. They restrict me from my growth or the life I want to live, the world I want to be in, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the other side, you have people that are like all about relationships. I can't wait to get into the next relationship. I'm sad this last one ended. I want to be in a relationship. I'm more of who I am in relationship than not. And I can't wait to be with that person, that special person. And I don't think either one of these are bad and wrong on their extremes. I think these are very valid viewpoints to come to. And often we talk a lot about relationships can be challenging, and there's a bunch of growth that we can do as individuals outside of relationship. And we talk about how relationships can be rewarding, but we don't often talk about the growth, the personal growth that can happen inside of relationships, because I think you and I, Antonia, would believe that there is growth that can happen inside a romantic pair bond relationship that is impossible or at least not very accessible outside of that dynamic.
So what I hear you saying is that there's these two camps that on one side, the assumption is that growth happens when you're alone. Like you've got to be out of a relationship in order to discover yourself and to grow as a person. And then on the other side is this idea of like, I need to be in a relationship and when you get out of one, you immediately go into the next one. And in that camp, even though there's nothing wrong with that person either, the assumption is that they're not growing in the relationship. And when you said that there's nothing wrong with these two extremes, I mean, given that most extremes are not terribly healthy.
Well, yeah.
But basically what you're saying is that you can take these two ideas and mush them together and actually see relationships themselves as an opportunity to do growth like you would when you were outside of one. Like when you're outside of the relationship, that's usually when a person goes, well, I'm going to pay attention to myself and I'm going to discover things about myself and I'm going to grow and become the best version of myself. And oftentimes this is either just for your own sense of, self-fulfillment, or it could be that I want to prepare myself so that when I get into the relationship, I'm the best version of myself or I'm a great version of myself to show up there. But you're positing that in the relationship itself, you can continue to grow and you can continue to refine and become, quote unquote, the best version of yourself by using the relationship or coupledom itself as a platform.
That is what I'm saying. And I also think that we've lost a cultural expectation inside of our relationships that when the going gets tough, we're going to stick it out and figure it out anyway. And I think we always have an escape valve. Oh, if the going gets tough, I'm just going to end this relationship and find a better one, something that serves me better. And I think there's value in growth inside of a relationship where the going has gotten tough. Now, immediately I want to say, if you're in an abusive dynamic, someone's abusing you physically, verbally, sexually, whatever, I'm not suggesting to stick that out. Just want to make sure I say that out of the gate. I'm saying that when, compromise has to happen, the going gets tough, you're not always getting along all the time, there is some value, I think, that our grandparents and older generations might have had where they just said, you know what, we've committed to each other to this relationship. We're going to stick this out thick or thin. And often those relationships get into their later years and there's a bliss time period. There's a appreciation for the other and there's growth that happened in having to stick it out. And I think there's a lot of value in that in our current culture we might lose. So yes, I'm talking about specifically there's avenues of growth when you're partnered with somebody. And I think there's growth by sticking something out with someone and finding the through line, the compromises, rather than just cutting and running at the sign of the first hardship.
I suspect that the reason why we have so little determination in staying with a relationship that's going through tough times is probably a reaction to previous times when you couldn't leave. Like there was no option. And so if the relationship was really bad, it didn't matter because the cultural expectation was that you stayed together no matter what. And so growth doesn't really happen in those kinds of relationships either. If you have to stay in a really, truly terrible situation, it's hard to grow if the situation is causing trauma or if the other person knows you're not going to leave and that gives them a hall pass to behave however they want to. So in a relationship that can't be separated, that's not really a very fertile, landscape for growth either. But on the other side, the 180 is if things get too hard, relationships aren't supposed to be hard. So then this is not a good relationship. So I'm going to bounce. That's not a very good context for growth either, because you're leaving when things get uncomfortable. You're leaving before you can learn the lessons that the discomfort is pointing out to begin with. So the happy medium in between this is to realize that you don't want to stay in a bad situation, right? Bad being defined as something that is unlikely to become better. That's really what it is the potential in this relationship gone. And that can happen if you pair with the wrong person, if the situation is just, maybe you were too young, or maybe there were things that you didn't know about this individual, or maybe you guys have hit, these two people have hit a non-negotiable. One person wants to have children. They didn't know that at the beginning of the relationship. Now they do. They got into the coupledom by both saying, nope, I never want children ever, ever, ever. And the one person knew themselves well enough to be able to say that definitively, and the other person didn't. In a situation like that, it's not, nobody's bad. It's just a situation has a non-negotiable that has emerged. And in those kinds of situations, often tragically, you have to uncouple in order to get both people's non-negotiables met. But I would say that there does seem to be a tendency to idealize what a really great relationship takes. And the idealization is that if you're with the right person, it works itself out. And being in a relationship that I would argue is one of the better relationships that I'm aware of. Yours and my relationship, Joel, is a fantastic relationship for me anyway. I love being in a relationship with you. I love our partnership. And I would say that even though I'm pretty sure you're the right person, that doesn't mean that that has always pulled us through. Like there are a couple different times in our past that I would say that if we weren't so growth oriented, if we hadn't been very much focused on seeing the situation we were in as an opportunity to become better, it would have been very easy to call it quits. And I think that that's probably every great relationship. Every great relationship has a moment when you're looking at the other person, reevaluating why you're there. Like, is this worth it? Are all these fights okay? Like, am I supposed to be here? Like, I love this person, but like maybe life would just be easier if I didn't have to deal with all this shit. I think that that's not uncommon in a relationship when the two people love each other very much. And they very much want to be together, but life will be a pressure cooker on you. And you will go through situations where it doesn't matter who your team member is. You are reevaluating everything. And so the relationship itself then becomes an opportunity to figure out some things that maybe being single wouldn't teach you, that being single can't teach you, because those are the situations that only coupledom brings out.
I've been doing a lot of growth in my mindset around relationships in the past few years, because I definitely overvalued my own experience in what I had expectations around a relationship to be, a romantic relationship. And I realized that my expectations aren't everybody's expectations. And one of the things that really helps us with this is anytime we're doing coaching in our company or we're creating programs, digital programs for people, we get in the mindset of people going through those programs of that coaching. Obviously, in coaching, we're talking to people in real time about their relationships, their life, or we're creating a program where we have to say things that help people actually make an impact in their life. And so that, as a content creator, someone that's a coach or content creator, it helps me think in terms of what does this person need to hear? And I have to question my own perspectives and expectations and my own biases I bring to something creating that. So we're creating our couples mapping program the last few weeks that's been released for couples to go through and understand how their personalities are wired, how partner A and partner B are wired, how they're making decisions, learning information. They can compare and contrast to make better decisions together as a couple, coordinate better, right? And all the different things that come from that. And I was positing to you, Antonia, that we frame the entire couples mapping program with this idea that don't you want to create this highly calibrated partnership relationship where you can go and change the world, be dominant as a couple, influence your community, be leaders, co-lead, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we had this conversation offline. You're saying, Joel, that's not everybody's expectation or even hope for their relationship. Like they don't all want that. So we have to put the message in there that's going to appeal to somebody that doesn't necessarily want to create their relationship to go start a podcast together as a couple, or create programs, or be in a leadership frame. That's you, Joel. That's not everybody in relationship.
Yeah, most people aren't looking for their partnership to be global domination.
Exactly, right?
Like this power couple that like goes and takes over everything. I don't even know if I'm that committed to that kind of relationship. Right. But I know that you love the idea of being a power couple, and you love the idea of like, yeah. I think most people in relationships just want to know that person has their back. That's the baseline. And as we were going through creating this program, we realized that at a baseline, most people go through life they choose to travel the one precious commodity they have of their timeline. Like the most precious commodity we have is time. When we choose somebody else to go on our timeline with us, what we really want to know is that this person has our back, that they are going to be there for us, defending us when we need defending, being a team member when we go through hard times, not a competitor, not somebody who's going to be at your throat, not a person who's always going to be in some sort of power game with you or, struggling all the time. You just want to know that this person, like, there's a reason you chose them to be your travel companion through life. And so as we were talking about what's the foundational characteristic that really helps people have a good, solid team dynamic, right? This person's got your back and you've got their back, all the way up to global domination as a power couple, and everything in between. What is a key characteristic you need to have for your partner? And the word gratitude just kept coming up over and over. So in the program we just made, one of the big things we tried to do is acknowledge how obnoxious we can be as people, based on personality types, of course, because that's our area of expertise. But it's like, what are the most annoying things about your partner? What are the things that nobody would know until they lived with them, right? And there's always something. There's always something about your partner that drives you up the wall. And even you and I, Joel, we're very,
What?
I know, we're very cognitively similar, right? And yet, even though we share so many characteristics, there's still components of our shared cognitive wiring that drives each of us crazy about the other person. We know how obnoxious we are. We experience it every day. So how do you go from feeling this person is maddening and wanting to change qualities and characteristics that you may have fallen in love with? Those might have been the things that you originally found attractive. But now you're living with them on a day-to-day basis and you're seeing all of the other things that emerge from being wired this way. How do you live with those characteristics? How do you live with these qualities of this person that drive you mad? And the answer is to transform any indignation that has started to surface. Indignation being this idea that you lack justice, right? This person was supposed to be this way. That's how they marketed themselves. When I was first around them, they were so awesome, and all of these characteristics that I fell in love with were all being marketed at their best. And now that I'm living with the person and seeing them day by day and seeing all of their imperfections, I'm now indignant that imperfections came along with this well-marketed package. How do you go from indignation back to gratitude? Because when you first run into a person and fall in love with them, you can't help but feel grateful. You're so grateful that this person entered your life. You're so grateful that you have somebody now that you can just, you get to spend your time with, and they turn all of your experiences into more positive experiences. It's all gratitude. It's over time we start to become indignant. What? It comes with negatives? What? You're imperfect? What? You can drive me crazy? I didn't sign up for this. And also, all the things you feel indignant about are built on top of a foundation of the things you originally were grateful for. So how do you find yourself back to gratitude? And that is in and of itself a personal growth process. because all of those things you feel indignant about are being mirrored. They're mirroring back to you the imperfections you're bringing to the relationship. Most of the things that we find unacceptable are things that we are very much pumping out into the coupledom ourselves. They're not trusting me. Well, how much are you trusting them? Trust is a reciprocity. It's very much built. We like to believe that trust is built over time through all of these behaviors and acts. But the truth is that trust, the easiest way to build trust is to trust the other person. Because trust is one of those things. I mean, think about it for yourself. Who do you trust the most? The people who trust you. That's how it works. All of the things that they find super important, I don't find those things important, so they shouldn't either, which is going to be mirrored back that the things that you find important, they're not particularly finding important. And so then it becomes a matter of like vying for supremacy of who gets to determine what the important things are and what the small stuff is, right? And you look at each other and go, don't sweat the small stuff. You're bringing that same thing into the dynamic. So staying in a relationship when things start to get hard, when they start to become, grating, when you start to feel that sense of indignation that they marketed themselves better than they are on a day-to-day basis, which of course we all do. But when you're feeling all of that, getting yourself back to gratitude, seeing your partner through the original eyes of appreciation that you had, and realizing all the stuff that you're pumping into this thing that are your responsibility for this dynamic. Man, that is such a growth project. You have to be in a space of humility. You have to be in a space of not vying for ego supremacy. You have to see the relationship as a third entity that also needs to be nourished, and that it's part of your responsibility as an individual to nourish that third entity. It's about disrupting bad behaviors that you're bringing to it, or disrupting bad dynamics that you're a part of, and then being patient through the recalibration, right? Through the readjustment time period of that. And then not needing to be patted on the back all the time for all of these amazing things you're doing. It really is about seeing that this thing that you're creating with another person in some ways takes precedence over all of your desires. It's about learning compromise. Like the skill of compromise is you cannot build the art of compromise better than you can in a romantic relationship. You will absolutely master it in a romantic relationship if you give yourself the opportunity to do so.
I have a little framework that's developing in my head here as we're talking that I think one of the reasons why I tend to escalate relationships in the way I did, like, take over the world, power couple, big things, is because I have a fundamental belief that that's what a growth relationship means in and of itself. So I came up with this little metaphor, this little 3-part metaphor here, and maybe we can unpack this. I have 3 aspects of a relationship. I just wrote these out as we're talking. Like I didn't think about this before we started recording. They came to me as we're recording. It's very extroverted intuition. I have treading water, running on the track, like the racetrack, and then cutting through the jungle together. So if you imagine 2 people in water, treading water together, it's great to have another companion there. If you're going to sit there and tread water, it's nice to have another person with you while you're treading water. It makes it less lonely. You're treading water anyway. You might as well have a companion with you. Well, then there's another metaphor of running the track. I want to run the track. I want to have certain things in my life. I want to run this track of life, the game of life. I want to have kids. I want to have a career. I want to run around this track like I've been given the script for. And I'd rather not run by myself. I want to run next to somebody. I want to run around the track with somebody in my life because that feels more rewarding. And then the third metaphor is cutting through the jungle. I have somewhere I want to go. There's a mountain in the distance I want to get to. And I'm going to cut through this jungle. And it would sure be nice to have somebody with me with another machete as we cut through the jungle and cross the rivers and camp out under the stars. I want somebody with me in that journey. And I'm realizing my own bias is that I only really see that third metaphor of cutting through the jungle to the mountain in the distance as the viable growth option of a relationship. Like I don't have any interest in being on the track, running in circles, having 2.5 kids and a white picket fence in front of my yard and going through like basic American life. And I certainly don't want to just tread water and just be in a relationship because I don't know what else I'm doing with my life. I'm just kind of hanging out in my apartment with this partner of mine. To me, no wonder there's conflict in both of those scenarios, right? I'm running around the scripted life, this track of life that's been done before and will be done after I'm gone. Well, of course, I'm going to turn to my partner running next to me and have issue with them and be upset with them and have challenges and maybe want out because I'm tired of the track itself. Maybe I'm not even tired of them. And the treading water situation is the same thing. But if I'm going toward a mountain I've never been to before and I'm cutting through the jungle with this person next to me, that feels rewarding. It's unexpected. I don't know where we're going to camp tonight. We're going to figure it out together. We're on an adventure and a journey together. And in that, I have a bias toward that's how I see growth in a relationship, is we're going towards something bigger than the two of us. So I look at the people treading water and say they're waiting. I look at the people running around the track and I say they're operating. And I look at the people that are a couple striving toward that mountain in the distance and I say they're adventuring. And I've chosen my life to say I would love to be adventuring as much as possible.
Well, it's a good thing that you partnered with somebody who also enjoys having a machete in their hand. Because I think I can appreciate the perspective you're coming from. I think that two people treading water, nobody actually wants to tread water. So when I hear your metaphor that you just came up with, I don't think of it in terms of evaluation. I think of it in terms of life circumstances and goals and what a person wants out of life. Nobody wants to be treading water. And if you're a couple that is treading water, you're probably over leaning on each other. When I think of treading water, I think of people who are like barely surfacing. And if you've got another person who's treading water with you, you might, in your tiredness, grab onto them and hold on to them. And now both of you are sinking because you got tired. And I think a lot of couples are treading water in their life. And when they lean on the other person in moments of exhaustion, that person can't afford it. And so it ends up being that the person that you are in it with, you guys are in this together, unintentionally end up feeling like you're using each other because the circumstances that you're in are too much for both of you. So any couple that is having a lot of fights, a lot of challenges, a lot of seeing each other maybe as the enemy or a competitor, what are your life circumstances? Are you treading water together? Is this basically the only person who really understands the situation that you're in? And is there any way that you can get out of treading water together? Maybe it has nothing to do with your partner. You're just as in love with them and just as grateful for them as you always have been. But life circumstances are making it so that it's hard to lean on each other. It's hard to really show up, the best way that you can because life itself is knocking the wind out of your sails.
Yeah, I think there can be a station of life here. I would say a lot of people that are younger find themselves in this treading water situation, as they are trying to find themselves basically of who they are personally and who they are in this relationship. And there can be a treading water example there. I totally understand that. And I think that it is circumstantial. It may not be your partner that you're challenged with. The challenges might be arising because you're in cold water and the sharks are circling and you have to both be treading to just stay alive, metaphorically speaking, and maybe literally in your life, that now you're fighting about things you wouldn't be fighting about if you were out of the water on dry land.
Yeah. Well, and I think when you're young, sometimes that can almost amplify the romance of it because you're young and everything is optimistic and you've got time in front of you. I think if you don't solve that, if you're not able to go to the next phase of not treading water as a couple, like not getting out of those life circumstances, that can really weigh on a couple. I've seen people in their 40s and 50s still treading water as, in their life circumstances, and that really weighs on the couple. And you can tell when a couple has even taken that context and turned it into an opportunity for growth because those people become really good teammates. They're really good because, we say, it's like, well, get out of that situation of treading water. Well, sometimes you can't. Sometimes the world around you, the environment around you is just bigger than your ability to navigate out of it. Like most of the time we have more power and control in our lives than we give ourselves credit for. And other times we just don't. Like the world is just the world and we're just where we're at. And that's just all there is to it. And the couples who really have each other's back, even in those kinds of contexts, and use even a treading water context to be stronger together, Those people are just, I mean, they will outrun everybody in a three-legged race because they have learned to have each other's back even in the worst of circumstances. In the second illustration you used of like running a track, that's not as interesting to you and I because we are not as interested in a templatized life. But I would say that probably most couples, they're looking for somebody to run beside them in a templatized life. Regardless of whether or not they have the 2.5 kids and the white picket fence, there is an image of relationship that a lot of people are looking for. And if they can find somebody else who will run with them in life, just do the things that life requires of us together, I think that they're in a better situation. They start out in a better situation than the treading water couple. That couple has a real fight on their hands. If you have things a little bit more established and life is a little bit more like it's on rails for you, then what ends up happening, I think, is that if there isn't enough adventure, sometimes the mundanity of that kind of context can start making you see your partner as not exciting enough, particularly if you start to lose your sense of youth. When you're younger, everything is optimistic. You have time in front of you. Everything is a big possibility. But as you start aging and your possibilities start leaving, then this person who may have been there with you and you were there for them through all of this suddenly becomes like, is that the best offer I could have gotten? Which is, of course, a terrible thought and one that's entirely human to think. What if my possibilities aren't there anymore? What if I don't get to do all the things that I thought I was going to do in life? And what if this is not the life I really wanted and time is starting to get away from me and oh God, right? And then in those kinds of situations, if you don't have somebody that you've been really working to establish a growth relationship with and a partnership with, they can start to seem expendable, or maybe the relationship can start to seem expendable. Or even if it's not a midlife crisis, which is basically what I'm describing, even if it's just a matter of, you've been living life together and running side by side, but you haven't really been, focused on that gratitude piece, then all the little things of mundane life start to stack up higher and higher and higher. And you get to a place where you're like, you're not as advertised. You're not making every moment of my life as positive as it could possibly be. And we turn a blind eye to the things that we throw into that. I think that the running side by side on a track probably more mirrors the experience I was talking about earlier in this podcast, which is that it's easy to become indignant of the things that we were originally grateful for. But that final illustrative piece of the partnership that's built on adventure, of taking a machete to the jungle and heading towards the mountain, that is the most romantic idea, but it actually might be the hardest. Treading water for 30 years is pretty freaking hard, so I don't want to underplay that. But the idea of, doing this big thing together and, like having a big adventure and lots of ambition and world domination or whatever, I think the biggest challenge with that is you have to be side by side with your partner all the time. And not everybody is cut out for the kind of relationship where you are so intrinsically linked to the other person that you almost don't have a lot of space. You and I have chosen to go that direction. We're very close. We spend almost all of our time together. We have big game plans and visions and that we're going to do together as a team, but it also requires a lot from us. Like, we can't let little things go. We have to always be maintaining and working on a relationship at any given time because we might put ourselves in a really pressure cooker situation that if we haven't handled as many things as possible before that pressure cooker situation comes, because adventures are all about pressure cookers, if we haven't done that, then we could have a mine that we could have handled a lot earlier that ends up exploding in our face in a really bad moment. So you and I have decided to just constantly, perpetually be working on a relationship, which is at the exclusion of other things. Like, we don't have as much time to do other things because we're talking about a relationship all the time, which probably sounds like a nightmare to some people, honestly. I could totally see somebody who wants a more traditional templatized relationship being partnered with somebody like me and wanting to end their life over it. I would probably be so obnoxious to that person. And probably for you too, Joel. There's probably a person who just wants to live a really simple life, and you would be a way too complicated character for them. So we found each other, and that's good, and we have big game plans and machetes and all that stuff. But that's actually, in some ways, that's kind of a harder road to take, and it requires a lot more vigilance on our part. And because we've just chosen to take that road, we also recognize how many opportunities for growth a relationship can actually present to you. And so I think when we look at people who have other styles, and I'm sure there's lots of different illustrations we could give, the three that you mentioned, that's probably the tip of the iceberg. There's probably lots of different styles of relationships people can be in. And just even deciding to do a little bit of growth in each of those different kinds of contexts can be a game changer. I mean, once again, the art of compromise, which is incredibly important. Like, the idea of compromise has gotten a really bad rap, I think, in the modern world. We see this word compromise and we assume it means that we're compromising ourselves, that we're allowing people to do things that, that we didn't consent to, right? That we're compromising our identity or who we are. But that's not really what compromise is. That's beyond compromise. That's not having boundaries. That's giving up things we can't afford to give up. That's different. Actual compromise is the art of finding the right tension point between the subject, yourself, and the object, the other person, or an outside circumstance that requires something of you. And requiring everything to be on your terms, that's obviously unhealthy, right? That requiring everything to be on your terms means that you believe that you're the only person of any importance. And obviously nobody likes that kind of person. We all see that kind of person as a little pathological. And on the other side, it's also a problem. Handing everything over to everybody else. That's why compromise got a bad rap, because that's also just as one-sided and imbalanced.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision-making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action-focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show.
So every situation is trying to figure out, how much of myself do I give? How much is unacceptable for me to give? How far can I go? How much do I require of the other person? And there's a tension there of the compromise. And relationships help you master the art of compromise. It helps you learn what are the things that are non-negotiables for you that you can't afford to give up. If you give those things up, well, then you have compromised yourself. On the other side, what is something that you're being too grabby around? What is something that maybe is a desire or a want that you are over-attached to at the cost of somebody else's happiness? Like, at what point do your preferences no longer get to, trump their needs? So relationships are just this beautiful petri dish of compromises, constant and perpetual compromises, which is hard to learn in any other situation. There is something to be said for the beauty of being single. And we've been talking about relationships this whole time, so I want to mention the thing that we mentioned at the beginning, or revisit this idea that you can learn a lot about yourself when you're single. And in fact, if you are an adult and you have never been single, like, if you have an opportunity to be single again, I highly recommend you take it and take some time for yourself. This is a lot of times when we learn things like what our non-negotiables are, and the things around like what it is that we need and want out of life, and who we are and what we stand for. A lot of that is found when you're by yourself, when you're alone, and you don't have to always be thinking about another person. But those components are only really put to the test when you're asked to compromise. That's the only time that you can really evidence whether or not you've calibrated those things well and accurately. And I'm not indicating that if a person is single and has decided to stay single that they should be in a relationship, because a bad relationship is, in my opinion, worse than being single. Like, there's no reason to be in a terrible relationship. Being single is infinitely better. But I would argue that being in a good relationship, at least for me, is better than being single because it does allow me to see all of these different aspects. It requires so much more out of me than being single did. And so there are a lot of opportunities for growth and development when you choose to be solo for a while. But there are, if you let yourself and you don't allow yourself to just sort of rest into this arrangement and go, well, I did the hard work of getting somebody to be with me for the rest of my life, so I guess I can just rest on my laurels. There are so many opportunities that the relationship itself as a platform provides for growth and development and becoming a better version of yourself. And if you choose to use your relationship as that context, then two people, I think sometimes we fear growing because we're afraid we're going to grow apart, right? Like as if you become a better version of yourself, suddenly you're not going to be able to be compatible anymore. But I would argue that stagnation turns into a lack of compatibility. When two people are using it as an opportunity for growth, and if one person spearheads it and shows what can be possible, a lot of times the other person they'll start to feel self-conscious if they don't do at least something. And both of those people becoming better versions of themselves, using the relationship as a platform for that, in so many ways highlights things that no other context really allows you to access. Spaces around vulnerability, intimacy. There is nothing that will show you what your issues with intimacy are other than partnership and coupledom. And so understanding all of those pieces, and there are sometimes elements of ourselves with self-intimacy that are hard to access until we have them mirrored back in a relationship context. So there are advantages to being single for sure, but there are so many growth advantages to partnership that sometimes I think that we lose its potency. We either decide to stay single because we don't think we can grow in a relationship, or we don't use our relationships as an avenue for that. And in my opinion, looking at it through the lens of growth, you're leaving money on the table when you do that.
We talk about this idea. We've talked about it on the podcast before. We talk about it in our new couples mapping program. This idea that person A, partner A, and partner B get together and create a third entity, which is the relationship. And seeing the relationship as a third entity, our friend Bruce Music, who's a relationship expert, talks about it with the metaphor of a fire that you stoke, and you continually feed that fire together, and the relationship stays hot and burning and exciting, and that's the key. And I would say there's probably one more element here too. As we're talking, I'm realizing it's not just about partner A, partner B, and the third entity that is the relationship. It's also the context that relationship lives in. Because we just talked about the metaphor of treading water versus running on the track versus adventuring in the jungle. And I'm realizing that even if you, partner A and partner B, are both growing themselves individually, and they both see the relationship as a third entity that they need to feed and support what's in the best interest of the relationship as well as the two individuals, there's also a context that all three of those elements live inside of beyond just the two partners and the relationship. And I'm starting to see something here that's emerging as this is one of the challenges in this. If you were to look at my three metaphors, just assuming that I'm onto something around the tread water, running on the track, adventuring in the jungle. If you looked at it like a bell curve, the majority of people, I would argue, in relationship are running on the track together. And they're doing things with external metrics like raising children, being together for a certain amount of years, hitting certain job achievements, having friends, going through life together and hitting these outer markers. Some of those markers are on the script of life. Some of them the couple comes up with on themselves. And they're going through that in the context of the middle of that bell curve. Well, over on the one far side of it, you have couples that are treading water. And I would argue that these couples are more in a survival mode. They're more either survival, like literally they have to do what they can to get through the day, or they're just not grown up enough yet. Maybe they're younger and they haven't gotten to more of those templatized areas of life. So they're just more in I wouldn't call it survival, but more tethered to the survival elements, feeding ourselves, clothing ourselves, going through the basics of survival. When you get in the middle of the bell curve onto that running of the track, I would say that's more of a safety and security framework. You almost took like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and you overlaid this with this little bell curve. And then on the other side, the couple that wants to adventure together, it feels like they've moved up into love and belongingness and possibly even self-esteem, self-actualization. So you could almost see this as a progressive move over a timeline. Now, I'm not saying a couple can't be in the middle of that bell curve in the track running experience and that be the fulfillment of their life's purpose and wish and all the things. I'm not suggesting, of course I have bias, right? I have bias toward the adventuring side. So I'm not suggesting that couple in that running on the track context isn't going to have success in their relationship. But I would argue that the couple that is on either side of that bell curve probably has an easier time leaning on each other because it's more obvious that the risks outside of the relationship are the ones causing the turmoil. So what do I mean by that? Well, the couple that is in treading water, quote unquote, surviving, well, they realize like if the paycheck doesn't come in this week, they're in this together. They may not have enough money or food to make it. And so they have each other's backs, quote unquote, to do what needs to be done to make the resource to feed themselves. That's on like the most primal, severe case. And then on the other side, the adventurers are out cutting a jungle trail. They're far from civilization. They have to have each other's backs because if there's darkness, metaphorically, and there's just a campfire lighting the way and they're camping out under the stars and danger comes, well, they're the only two that know they're out there in the jungle. They have to have each other's backs because this external thing is threatening them there as well.
And I was just going to say that metaphorically, I mean, the treading water is easy to see metaphorically as like, financial challenge. And the adventure piece can sometimes be financial challenge too, but it's more of like maybe the couple has chosen to start a business together and it's more entrepreneurial and the two of you are in it together and you need to make sure that both of you are showing up. Otherwise, this venture you started could collapse. And so there's more of that. So I just wanted to bring like a little bit of practicality to the metaphor. That's the kind of context you're talking about, right?
Absolutely.
Venturing into the unknown.
And I'm going to add yet another metaphor onto here. Just to complicate it even more, some ENFP, and we like to do that. You could also look at this through the lens of hunting and gathering versus farming. Again, I see the two sides of this bell curve, the treading water and the adventurers, almost like hunter-gatherers. Their survival or dependence of their coupledom is day in and day out. Every day they have to get up and support each other in order to be able to make it through the world. Like my survival or my achievements or whatever are dependent on my partner being with me in this. And it may not seem like it, but the couple that's on the track has a bunch of infrastructure, farming infrastructure, literal agriculture, supporting society they can plug into and just run on the track with not very many hiccups. And so they lose sight that their partner's in this with them. And we can see this on a global scale in the recent pandemic that just hit all of us. We can see how disruptive throwing people into a hunter-gatherer framework is when they're so used to running on that treadmill or that track of life as farmers, the metaphor of farmers, people that are hooked into the system goes down and now, oh no, and you see couples ending their relationships, having a lot of turmoil and fights, like it's causing a lot of distress because they were so dependent on the outside systems for their survival, they weren't dependent on each other. And so this dynamic comes in here as well.
Well, and I would say that as many couples as I've seen have challenges during this time period, just as many couples have re-established their closeness because they had to. So it's like things got real. They got thrown in together. They're like constantly with each other, and it's created strain, and it's created, on the other side of it, it's created opportunities for intimacy. It's like it forced people to have to grow. And I think that goes back to, basically what you're saying, which is that in certain kinds of relationships, the need to grow might not be so obvious because it's more about two lives that are running in parallel than it is about having a strong team relationship. And when you have circumstances that force you back into looking at your partner in terms of team, then you now, when life forces you to grow, you get to see how beautiful it is when your partner starts to grow in front of you and you start to grow in front of them. And I think just anything that's a disruptive to life gives us those opportunities. But if you haven't been growing, then when life throws that at you, it's kind of a mixed bag. Which direction are you going to go? And what I think is the through line of this particular subject is that when you choose to use your relationship as a foundation of growth, when you choose to use it as a platform of growing, then when you get into these moments when life throws you a curveball, you've already established that team relationship. You've already established the trust that comes from growing together. You've established the intimacy. You've built skills of having to communicate in ways that are not triggering. Man, a big piece of the program we just put together, couples mapping, is, I mean, I would argue almost everything is about communication. It really is about communicating to your partner and all the different ways that our communication goes wrong, all the ways that we talk past each other, all the ways that we crosstalk, all the ways that we try to show, love and the other person isn't reading it from us and vice versa. All the different ways that we can say one little thing and it turns into an explosion versus how we intended for it. All the ways that we need to connect first before we start to communicate. Like, communication is such a huge part of any relationship. And if you don't use your relationship as an opportunity to grow as individuals and as a couple, then when things can't be ignored any longer, or things can't be swept under the rug, or life puts us in a situation where we feel the squeeze, if we haven't been using it as an opportunity to grow, we might not have the skills and tools we need in those moments to communicate the way that we need to communicate to survive. Because communication is really the lifeblood of any relationship, any pair bond partnership, any coupledom. Communication is its lifeblood. And so growing as two people together in a team makes it so that even when you just want to wring that person's neck, which is inevitable, by the way, any really good relationship has a moment when you imagine your partner dying in kind of horrific ways.
Jeez.
Or maybe that's just me. No, seriously,
you heard it
right?
here first.
Well, I'm okay. Maybe you don't actually imagine your partner dying in horrific ways, but what is Stewie say on Family Guy? I don't want to kill her. I just don't want her to be alive anymore. And there's going to be a moment when you look at your partner and you're like, I don't want to kill them. I just don't want them to exist. And so I think that's inevitable that you're going to feel that way. And there are ways to get through that and to the other side and become stronger by seeing the context itself as a way to grow that any other context wouldn't be able to bring it out in you. Like, how do you go from the person who's imagining the death of your partner to becoming the kind of person who is absolutely 100% certain that this is the person they want to be traveling life together? How do you do that? You do that by growing, by becoming better, by acknowledging you have those moments, by talking about it with your partner, like the reasons why you have them and having them hold space for it and having these great conversations. So yeah, I think that using your partnership as an opportunity to become a better person in whatever way you set up your life, I think it can't be understated in how powerful that is.
As we get closer to concluding for today, this conversation, I just want to be clear that you don't have to see a relationship as a growth opportunity. It's like being a parent. You don't have to go, well, I'm a parent, so now I'm going to use this as my growth tool in my life. Although if you approach parenting with the notion or the idea that, oh, I could use parenting children to understand more about myself and other people, and I can use that as a growth framework, it's an opportunity. That's, I think, a good thing if you can use that as an opportunity. So same thing with your relationship. If there's an opportunity here for you to use your relationship for growth, maybe you didn't get into the relationship with that intention, but you find yourself in this place and you say, you know what? I can look at this partner. I can be dissatisfied. I can find all the negatives. I can be upset by this, or I can put my head down, maybe muscle through some of those challenging things. And there's a lot that can be taught here. I can learn so much about myself and grow so much as myself, no matter if I'm treading water, if I'm on the track, if I'm adventuring. There are things to learn here that I can connect to my own life and learn. I think that's a valid place to come from.
So basically what you're saying is you don't have to use a relationship to grow, but it couldn't hurt.
Yeah, in a roundabout way. And it certainly beats trying to kill your partner.
Yeah.
Or imagining them dead in these horrific ways that I just found out about.
Unfortunately, wherever I said that in this podcast, I don't think that we can edit that out. So I think it just has to live. And I didn't mean it that dramatically, I promise.
Just hope there's no suspicion of my murder someday.
It might, yeah. Don't die in a horrible way, please. Please, because this will definitely be incriminating. I think my introverted thinking or accuracy function just wants to acknowledge that sometimes we don't feel that generous about our partner. And anybody who says that they've never thought bad things about their partner is lying. I believe they're lying. But that said, yeah, no, most people are not imagining their partner dying in terrible ways.
So we started this out, and I went off on a tangent with this little metaphor, and we went down that train of thought. But basically, we started the framework here. We're going to talk about the things that you can only learn when you're in partnership, or the things you can only grow with another person. And let's just recap those really quickly here. We talked a little bit about compromise, the skill of compromise. It's something that if you're by yourself, it's hard to compromise with yourself because you get to just, do whatever you want to do. So if you're with a partner, compromise is obviously one of the growth avenues you have in coordinating your lives together. One of the things that you mentioned, Antonia, was intimacy. This idea of being able to be intimate with another person and put your heart on the line, express the things that are deepest for you, some of the emotions, the motivations, the fears, the worries, the doubts, all of these things you can share with another person and deepen intimacy with another human. And I would argue that also can help you grow with your own self-intimacy. Like as you get to express this with someone, you start to learn more about yourself, and you may be able to be more intimate with yourself because this person gives you an avenue to express some of those deepest parts of you.
I don't know if we spelled it out in this way, but I think we did touch on the ability to be a good teammate. I think partnerships and romantic relationships teaches us an ability to be a teammate better than just about any other circumstance. And I don't just mean in terms of compromise, but also in terms of the expectation, as mentioned, is that I've got your back and you've got mine. That's why we're traveling through life together. And so what does it mean to have somebody's back? What does it mean to be willing to be there for someone, even if you're going through a hard time as well? I think relationships teach us to be better teammates and team members when you have this one person's got to creatively problem solve with you or go through all of the darkest moments or, be there through all the hard times. I think that that's something that's hard to really grow or manifest in other contexts. You can in some other contexts a bit, but I think a partnership does it on a level that no other situation really brings out in us.
So what do you think? You've been listening to this conversation, this wildly all over the place conversation talking about relationships. You heard Antonia confess that she's fantasized about murdering me in horrible ways. What?
To be fair, it was more an attempt to represent a group of people who maybe don't get to say that out loud. Yeah. It was catharsis. It wasn't. I'm not actually thinking about how to kill you. I promise.
Well, the worst part is I know it's coming. I just don't know what method it's going to be. You didn't give me the specifics. I just know you're planning it, and it's going to be horrible. I just have to wait.
I promise it will be quick. It's always quick.
As long as it's quick.
It's always quick.
As long as it's. Like, I don't think I'm afraid of dying. I just don't want to feel the pain on the way to the death.
I'll make sure that it's real. It's clean. I'll make sure it's real clean.
Clean. It's just like it's like the end of The Sopranos or something. Yeah. Just done. Just over. Be great. What do you think, though? Come over to personalityhacker.com. Leave a question, a comment, or your story about your relationship experience. Have you been in a growth relationship? Do you wish you were in a growth relationship? Is that not what you want? You love the fact that you and your partner, you have your lives set up and you're doing your thing and you're growing on your own, in your own way, and that works well for you. I'd love to hear that story too. Let us know over at personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Make your voice heard.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review on iTunes, that helps us out a lot. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. It is available at all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And we have a suite of programs that are tailored to your personality type to do all of that personal growth we were talking about. So if that sounds interesting to you, head over to personalityhacker.com and look at our suite of programs. See if there's one that's right for you.
Specifically, the couples mapping program, because it deals with relationships directly. You should check that one out.
That's right.
We put a lot of work into it and we stand behind it. We think it'll be a great program for you to go through for your own relationship. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.